You're tuning into the Channel 6 Action News Team with Seth Kaufman and James Choi, and we're here to bring you the latest updates in news. And now we go live to our news studio where James will introduce our top stories. Take it away, James.
Good evening, I am James Choi. Tonight on a special segment of Action News, we have a hot topic, arson. Arson is setting fire to a building intended to harm someone. Over the recent months, Coatesville, a town in Pennsylvania, has been terrorized with a series of serial arsons. Andy Kaufman, a firefighter for the Huntington Valley Fire Company and the Independent Fire Company in Jenkintown, has given us some information about this. He has 34 years of knowledge and experience, so we asked him to be on our show tonight to see why someone would do something like this. While the answers Andy gives are based on his 34 years of experience and do not reflect the views of the Huntington Valley Fire Company and the Independent Fire Company in Jenkintown. Now we go live to Seth Kaufman.
Thanks, James. So, Andy, what do you think about the Coatesville arson?
You know, Seth, the Coatesville arsons are a tragedy to a town. Any fire that destroys property and hurts people is a true tragedy.
I see what you mean, Andy. So, why do you think the assistant chief was accused of setting those buildings on fire?
Seth, I've had a lot of experience and I've had a lot of training. And one thing is that firefighters, whether it be an officer or whether it be just a firefighter, some of them are really, really excited about fires. They're excited about putting fires out. And many of them will actually set fires just so they can be the first to the firehouse, the first to the station, to go put the fire out. It's a tragedy, it's a shame. Not all firefighters feel this way, but many of them have in the past, and that's what causes problems.
Do you think there was anything that influenced the people involved in the Coatesville arsons to do this?
Well, Seth, as I mentioned to you, one of the alleged arsonists was a fire officer. One of the other alleged arsonists wanted to be a fireman. He tried to become a firefighter and was rejected. He even was found with firefighting equipment in his car. Many people who turn out to be arsonists will do it out of rejection, because they were rejected from the fire department, and then they try to prove themselves by starting fires and possibly putting them out.
Robert Tracy Jr. was the assistant chief who was accused of setting 2 fires in Coatesville because they caught him on surveillance. Also, another accused person was Roger Barlow, who was accused of setting off 9 row houses in the Coatesville area, which caused a 7-alarm fire. The other suspect, Mark Gilliam, was unheard of, but he and Roger Barlow admitted to it. Do you think Robert Tracy was working with the other suspects, Roger Barlow and Mark Gilliam?
You know, Seth, that's really not for me to say, and I really can't comment on that. That's up to the police and the federal enforcement agencies to investigate and make that determination.
How do you think these arsons affected the town of Coatesville?
The town of Coatesville considers these a terrorist attack. They're terrorized, they're frightened, and they're fearful. They're fearful for their lives and they're fearful for their property. So arsons, especially when you have arsonists running around, create a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of frightened people within the town that they're with, especially in Coatesville right now.
Do you think the arsons affected the trust between the citizens and the firefighters?
Not really, Seth. If anything, the trust is built even higher with the firefighters and the people of Coatesville. Now, the fact that the assistant chief was accused, from what I've heard, a lot of the firefighters had a feeling that he might have been involved at some point in time.
The trust between citizens and firefighters should never be broken, because firefighters need to protect this city, and they can't have that trust broken because they pretty much work for the city, and if you were to break that trust, things would be bad. What has Coatesville done to prevent these things from happening again?
Well, from what I understand, they're doing a lot of awareness. The community is starting up some town watches, and they're doing more surveillance. And they're keeping a closer eye at all the properties to keep this from happening. That's probably one of the reasons why Tracy was caught on surveillance, because they've been adding more surveillance to see who's around and who's been possibly doing these things.
How would you try to prevent arsons in the near future?
Well, arsons are caused by people who are somewhat pyromaniacs, people who are infatuated with fire. The way we handle those types of people is you have to identify that they like fire, that they hang around fire. You have to enforce, you have to use law enforcement to catch them. They have to go through a lot of psychological process. As far as to prevent an arsonist, you have to be aware, you have to be monitoring, you have to be surveilling the important properties. And if you find somebody who is prone to be a fire starter and arsonist, you have to have them get the psychological help that they need.
Do you think this will happen again in different towns?
Unfortunately, Seth, arson will happen again. Whether it happens in the size and the amount as what goes on in Coatesville, I hope not. But unfortunately, a lot of fires today are started by arsonists, and arson is always going to be prevalent. What we need to do is to be able to identify who an arsonist is and take care of them and make sure they don't start fires.
What is some advice you could give to our viewers?
Well, Seth, we've talked a lot about arson, but generally what we talk about all the time is fire prevention, and that's the biggest advice I can give. Don't play with matches, practice safe cooking practices, store flammable materials, whether it be gasoline, whether it be cleaning supplies or anything else, in safe and proper manners. Okay? And as far as arsonists, keep your eyes open. If you find somebody who seems to be infatuated with fire, who really thinks fire is an exciting thing, then you need to talk to them, you need to get them the professional help, because that is a potential arsonist. And just keep an eye on your own property and practice safe fire prevention practices.
So like Andy said, arson is a very dangerous thing. It's very tough to prevent, and it's very tough for the firefighters to stop arsons. It's also very tough to catch one. But if every arsonist were caught in this world, it would be almost impossible to catch them all. Thank you, Andy. It was a pleasure to interview you.
Thank you, Seth, and it was my pleasure to go ahead and give your audience a little bit of information and advice.
All right, back to you, James.
Thank you, Seth. That was a compelling story. I hope all of our viewers take Andy's advice to hopefully prevent these things from happening again. Our next story, Chili Fest 09, happening in our own hometown, Philadelphia, right after this commercial break.